Good afternoon. This is Robert O'Connor. I am an adult transracial adoptee and somebody who is transracially adopted as part of one of the first generations of transracially adopted individuals in the US. So that means our families were followed by leading sociologists like Dr. Joyce Ladner and longitudinal studies by the University of Minnesota and counter story or counter evaluations and those kinds of things, which I remember doing since I was at least 9 years old. Today, I'm a professor of social work at Metropolitan State University here in Minnesota, and I do a lot of trainings and supports for transracial foster adoptive families, kinship families, and transracial families across the country. But I wanted to share a quick example of culture in transracial families. Excuse me. So one day I was going into our local grocery store and I saw something that I had never seen before in all my years, and it stopped me. So, my family historically has never eaten cinnamon life cereal, but on that particular day, what I saw was an African American girl on the cover of cinnamon life cereal. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so I took that, I bought it, of course. And so I brought it home and I put it on the table along with the other cereal boxes at home, and just to see what my kids would do. And my son Elisha, he looked at it after a couple minutes and said, "Hey, tree, that looks just like you." And my daughter looked at it and she beamed. So I thought that was a great example of culture and how in transracial families that we have to be intentional about creating cultures in our own families that affirm everyone in the family, both the adoptive parents or foster parents, but also our children who are in our homes. So this is that cinnamon life cereal that I saw. The box, of course, yep, I just cut it out. And the reality is, I saw another one some other time later with an African American father with his African American daughter on the cover as well. And you're right, I purchased it. And so that was a great example. Again, first time it was noteworthy. That's why I bought it, is because it doesn't happen too often. And so, being an intentional parent for myself, if I'm raising or anybody is raising children of color in today's society, you are essentially raising children in a countercultural way if you're doing it the right way. You're raising your children in a countercultural way, which means for me is that society does not automatically affirm my children. I have 4 children, but society does not automatically affirm my children. The Gerber baby doesn't look like my children. The angels at Christmas time, they don't look like my children, right? The superheroes historically and princesses and all those positive examples historically do not look like my children. And so I have to be intentional about, again, creating an environment that really affirms my children. And another example, and I don't just shove it down their throat, I live it. And that's a major piece about culture is culture is important with respect to what you do, but it's also more important about how you live. And so just simply driving down the street one day, looking up and seeing a billboard that had the Chrysler 300C on it. And I said to my son, "Hey, isn't that a cool car?" And he said, "Yeah, that's a roadster car of the year, Dad. That's a cool looking car." I said, "Yeah, little old ladies like that car, and Snoop Doggy Dogg like that car." And he just smiled. I said, "Hey, an African American guy designed that car?" He said, "Really?" I said, "Yeah. He had 2 master's degrees in industrial engineering, and he created those cars." And my son said, "Huh." And we just kept on driving. So again, dropping those nuggets, being an intentional parent. And sometimes I have to parent in a countercultural way, but also sometimes in a counterintuitive way, which means when I'm raising children of color, sometimes there are some things that I have to do differently specifically the opposite of, because I'm parenting children of color than if I was parenting a Caucasian child. Now, I get a lot of parents who say, come on, Robert, a kid is a kid is a kid. They all have red blood, and, I don't care if they have freckles or whatnot. A kid is a kid. We don't have to pay attention to their culture, and you can just raise kids essentially culturally nondescript. But again, my opinion is if you are raising children of color in today's society and you're doing it well, you have to be an intentional parent, and um, you have to raise kids with positive self-esteem and racial identity. And that can be difficult and challenging when the children don't have people who look like them. For myself, I I was the only child of color in my entire town here in Little Canada. I don't know if you can see me. I don't know if you can find me in this picture. It might be hard. Well, there I am. Yep, you guessed it. Oh, another finger. There I am. So, what my experience was like being the only one in that classroom and in the majority of classrooms that I experienced in my education is sometimes being the only one means being alone. Being alone and having someone, being alone in your experience or being alone in my experience. And I had great parents and I had friends, but being alone and having someone who really could identify and understand what I was going through. And so that kind of isolation for kids, it can be very challenging, and it can develop a negative self-concept if we leave the racial identity and the self-esteem up to just our classrooms and up to social media and up to essentially society to provide the messages to affirm our children. So we have to be intentional about that and create the cultures to help our children develop positive self concepts, positive self esteem. I remember my mother, she did a great job. Anytime that she would buy a birthday card for me or a Christmas card, she said she would definitely try to find a child of color or a person of color, or if she couldn't find any cards like that, she would get a design or a cool animal or something of the sort. And an example of that would be this wonderful picture right here. This is a card that she got me. And, you know, as I was developing my identity, I needed to have positive, strong examples, affirming examples that made me think of myself as positive. So you can find cards. There's this whole psychological aspect of you will find what you look for. But if you never look for it, you probably won't ever see it or ever find it. You've had that experience, perhaps, of buying a new car, and all of a sudden, all of a sudden, you notice everybody's driving that same car. Huh. No, you see what you look for. Here's another example, and I have countless examples of culturally specific cards and posters and things that my mother was very intentional about making sure that I had. I remember one in college, struggling. My mom sent me this card, and she said, "Here's a picture of a young prince, and I thought of you." And what did she says? She said, "Dear Bobby," not many people call me that. She says, "I saw this card with the picture of a prince and decided to send it to you, another prince. Keep up the good work," on and on and on. So it doesn't have to be huge and over the top, but it should be a great example for our children to be able to send them messages that affirm them. Many folks, it's really important to understand that for the majority culture, our schools, our TV shows, our news, our movies, they will send positive images. They will see positive images of themselves portrayed in our media, in our history books, in our textbooks. I was on a show one time with a woman who was the first African American woman or African American to adopt a Caucasian child in Detroit. Of course, it was newsworthy because it didn't happen. So transracial foster care and transracial adoption historically has not been a two-way street. And the reality was is that this mother, she had an African American daughter that she was taking care of foster care, and a Caucasian daughter. They were sisters, and they allowed her to adopt the African American daughter, but they moved the Caucasian daughter out of her home to be adopted by a Caucasian family. She sued and she fought to be able to get the daughter back into her home, unite the siblings, and to be able to parent both of those children. Now, the interesting thing is that those experiences really helped the girl who identified as Caucasian. Why I shouldn't even say she identified as Caucasian, because she really identified with the African American culture. So, ethnically, she knew she was Caucasian. Culturally, she was African American. But the two kinds of placements are not the same when you have Caucasian parents adopting children of color and you have an African American or other ethnic groups adopting Caucasian children. The task of making sure that the children have positive examples of self esteem and supporting their racial identity is different because again our society will make sure will default because of the stories and the nursery rhymes, the history books, all the positive princesses and TV shows and everything that will, including the news. Even if something horrific happens, there will be plenty of other balancing and countervening messages and images that really help them to see positively about themselves and develop a really positive self-esteem. So those two kinds of placements, I get that, excuse me, questions sometimes about those two different placements. I'm gonna share one more picture. This is my Mounds View High School football picture, and I'm not sure if you can find me in there somewhere. You know, if not, I am right there in the middle. This is me. So the point is we have to be intentional because I did not develop a strong, healthy, positive sense of racial identity and self-esteem. It's important that our kids feel good about the skin that they're in. I had to do a lot of work once I left home to really feel comfortable again in the skin that I was in. And part of that work was seeing a therapist who specialized, an African American therapist who specialized in racial identity stuff. So I had to do a lot of work. My parents did a great job. They did the best they could with what they had at that time. And I love my parents. I'm very, very close to them. I see them all the time. My mom's a social worker just like I am. We used to work 8 cubes away from each other when we were at both at the state, me in adoption and guardianship, and my mother in children's mental health. So I just wanted to share quick examples of transracial adoption family culture. It is really important when kids join our multicultural families. They really have two arduous sometimes and dichotomous uh, challenges. One is to fit into the new family culture while developing an identity that's different from that family culture. So, not to get too technical, but I want to say I use the terms biculturalism versus assimilation, meaning, will the children just simply assimilate to the predominant culture of the family, or what the adolescents in my private practice have said, become whitewashed? Or will the home be bicultural, celebrating the culture of the adoptive parents as well as the culture of the children being adopted? And I can hear some people say, well, you know, they're new. They don't have a culture. They have a culture that they're part of. They have a history. They have a family and a community background that they also belong to. So biculturalism, making sure our homes are bicultural. And there are many ways to be able to make sure that our homes are bicultural. So much so that I decided to write a little handout, a document called 40 Ways to Increase Biculturalism in Transracial Families. I'll talk about that in another post. But I just wanted to go ahead and share an example, a couple examples of the importance of culture in transracial families. Again, this is Robert O'Connor. Thank you again for listening, and we'll talk soon. Take care.